welcome everybody. We're going to make a start. It's really good to see you all. Welcome to the Women at Work Building a Successful Career webinar. I'm Dr Suzanne Ross, and welcome from jobs.ac.uk. So they are an international job site and careers site for those people in higher education who are looking to build a career. So please have a look at the website. There's lots of resources and support there to help you in developing your career. So who am I? My name is Suzanne Ross, and I've got what may be called affectionately a portfolio career. I'm a part-time senior lecturer in executive education. I'm also a principal lecturer in short courses at Nottingham Business School. I'm also founder of my own consultancy, To Thrive Consultancy, and also Women Trailblazers. And I support people to develop their careers, especially into leadership and management roles. My background is actually in talent management and leadership development, and I'm a qualified and experienced executive coach. I haven't always been in academia. I did my doctorate late in life. I was in my late 40s, early 50s when I completed my doctorate and made that move into an academic environment. Here at the business school, I'm course leader for a number of women in leadership programs. And this sort of started about 5 years ago when we had the opportunity to design and deliver a Women in Leadership short course, which was a funded programme offered to female managers and leaders in small to mid-sized organisations in the region. And that just really took off when the funding started to come to a halt. We got more funding to do a Women in STEM leadership programme. And more recently, I've designed and been delivering a Women as Transformational Leaders programme. I've also designed with a really talented design team a FutureLearn micro-credential. So FutureLearn is a global digital learning platform. And they're created and inspiring women leaders micro-credential. And that's really addressing leadership more widely than in organisations and looking at female leadership in business and society. I'm also the module leader for the professional development module of the Masters in Management Leadership in Higher Education. Last year and again this year, I've also been a UN Women UK digital participant in the UN Commission for the Status of Women. That's CSW 69. And that's going on this week and next week. So if any of you are particularly interested in hearing that kind of global conversation around women and women in leadership, then please look in on the UN Women UK work and you'll find out lots of information around that. And I'm also a sole parent, so life is often quite busy. My 3 sons are grown up now, but I've been sole parent for about 15 years. So brought up 3 boys along with 1 slightly mummy dog. So before the session, we went out to you and identified some of the questions that you might have. And I've tried to incorporate those as much as possible into today's session. But for those joining live, if you do have any questions, if we've got time at the end, then I'll pop into the Q&A and have a look at some of those questions. If we don't have time, then I'll find some way to get some answers to you. So do pop some questions in the Q&A. So in today's session, it's quite an ambitious session. First of all, what I'm going to do is just reflect a little bit on that kind of broader landscape. What's the context that we're all kind of operating in? And then what are some of the specific challenges for women developing their careers in higher education? And then we'll get into the meat of the presentation. We'll look at some of the different career routes that we can take. There's no wrong and right in that. But each kind of career route or way we design our careers can have impact, pros and cons. So I just want to outline some of those. And then touch a little bit on some of the habits and beliefs that can hold women back and some strategies that we can use to overcome those. And I want to dig in a little bit into this idea of the double bind that women can particularly face as they become more senior in their role. And then I want to end with what I think is a really, really helpful way of looking at your support network and how you can make sure you've got the right people around you and you can be a little bit more strategic in thinking about that support network. So we had a number of questions from you. I've attempted to incorporate them as much as possible into the presentation today. There were lots of questions around progression. How do you plan your career when you're part-time and you're coming into higher education, perhaps as a second career in a male-dominated environment when you're stuck in a band? How do we remain a team player when also prioritising our own promotion? And there were questions around imposter syndrome, questions around how do we effectively leverage our skills, a whole host of questions around work-life balance and balancing personal and professional obligations. And then a whole host of questions around, how do we make sure we've got really good support networks? And how do we create networks where we are collaborating rather than competing, especially with other women? And I'll pick that conversation up a little bit when we talk about those different career pathways that we can progress down. So first of all, just to set the scene a little bit around that broader landscape. And if you've been really interested in exploring women in leadership, female empowerment, then this will be quite familiar to you. For those of you who'd like to understand more, the presentation will obviously go out to you with the recording. Please have a look at the links, especially the work that the UN Women group are doing. So UN Women identified some of the biggest hurdles that are facing women and female equality. Things like lack of women in leadership, especially in those legal policy roles, those real decision-making roles. Poverty and lack of economic opportunities, workplace discrimination and inequality, and this imbalance in unpaid care work. So UN estimate that by 2050, women globally will be doing 2.3 hours more per day than men in unpaid care work. But actually, we saw that during COVID. Research coming out of that time indicated that women were bearing the lion's share of carer responsibility, especially with homeschooling. And during COVID, it was estimated that women took on the equivalent of an additional part-time role alongside work and other commitments during COVID, which had a significant impact for women both during COVID and coming out of that period. We see across the globe inadequate access to education, lack of autonomy in healthcare, and inadequate funding of gender equality initiatives. So that's the kind of landscape, the broader landscape when we're talking about women at work and women's equality. There is a sense that we're moving a little bit backwards. It is a challenging time at the moment to be talking about women in leadership. We're seeing an impact in the US administration's rollback of EDI. We're seeing that in terms of termination of funding for initiatives, federal funding ban on key EDI terms, and in the confusion of that ban, one of the terms was at one point women and another was gender. So these terms actually getting bound on government websites, causing a review in grant funding for research. And the challenge there is that doesn't all exist in a vacuum. We're seeing increased pushback on EDI. We're seeing that anti-EDI rhetoric on social media. And obviously, a big challenge is in those big global organizations, especially where they are US led. We might see a halt to initiatives impacting UK subsidiaries. However, it's not all gloomy. There is an opportunity for the UK government and organisations to reaffirm their commitment. And we're certainly seeing higher education institutions doing that. So it's no surprise that the challenges for women in higher education really speak to those broader challenges. And so for women in higher education, that gender pay gap, really because of the lower numbers of academic leaders as women or being women, that underrepresentation in leadership positions. So although women comprise 53.8% of the higher education workforce, only 27.5% are in academic management roles. Work-life balance is particularly an issue for women in higher education because roles are quite demanding, academic roles, research roles, and administrative duties, and demanding those long hours. So being able to balance work-life can be particularly challenging. And we'll talk about that a little later on in the presentation. It's sad to see gender-based discrimination and harassment. So University College Union found 30% of female workers in UK universities had experienced some form of harassment. That lack of women representation in leadership roles then follows through into support networks that tend to be dominated by men, especially at those more senior levels. So it can sometimes sound a little gloomy. I'm forever the optimist. And, I think what's really, really important is that we certainly take ownership of our own careers, even in the midst of a challenging environment. So how do we do that? I think the very first thing is to focus on defining what success means for you and really clearly aligned to your values. My doctorate was in talent, success, and derailment. So I was looking at what does it mean to be talented? How do talented people go on to be successful? And what is it that causes people to stall, plateau, fail, or derail in their careers? And I had interesting conversations with people about this idea of success. And defining that for yourself, owning that definition. Sometimes as women, we almost inherit a definition from family and from friends, from comparison. But it's really important for you to take the time out to take a step back and think holistically, what does it actually mean to me to be successful? What values are really important to me? What's important to me in terms of how I live out those values? And that really helps us with this idea of work-life balance because I'm not a fan of the phrase work-life balance because we've all got 24 hours in the day and we need to think about how we're using those 24 hours. If we think about work-life choices, then when I'm defining success for me, it's my definition, it's holistic, it's about my personal and professional life, it's aligned to my values, then I can start to think about the work-life choices that I'm making and really start to think about what am I saying yes to and what am I saying no to. So with that really clear definition in mind of what it means to you to be successful, we can start to think about in a professional environment and how might we go about pursuing that. And I'm going to share with you two ways of looking at how we might develop our career. They're not the only ways, but I think they're two useful ways of thinking about how we can approach scoping our career. And the first approach is navigating. And we're almost conditioned to believe that that's the best approach. It starts when we're young. What do you want to be when you grow up? And the expectation is we're going to name a role, we're going to name an occupation, we're going to have an eye on what's the role that we want to move into. And we take that conditioning into organisations, and we're encouraged to climb the ladder. That's navigating. When we're navigating, we make our intentions known about a role that we want. So that might be lecturer, senior lecturer, it might be an administrative role, professional services, but we state the role that we're interested in. And then what we tend to do is we follow the rules. So we might get the job description, we might get the job specification, the personal specification. And higher education is almost set up in a lot of ways for navigating with a very clear, in some areas, avenues of progression. And it's a ladder. So we follow the rules of advancement. We might advocate with the hiring managers and the people appointing people to that role. And then the outcome, we get the role, we don't get the role. If we get the role, great, off we go again. If we don't get the role, then there's some identity work that we do. We might get some insight into where we went wrong. We might get some feedback. We might get some insight into the skills, knowledge, or capabilities that we might want to develop. Now, one of the questions that was asked was around, how do we make sure when we're progressing our career that we are collaborating and not competing, especially with other women? Now, the challenges with navigating, it almost sets you up for competition because most organisations, even complex organisations like higher education institutes, are pyramids at the top. There are fewer positions. And if you stake a claim to a particular role, you say you're interested in a particular role, and 4 or 5 other people are also interested in that, then you've set yourself up for that competition. There's another route that we can take. There's another way we can think about how we can develop our careers. And this often best suits people who are in part-time work, or they are developing a portfolio career, or they're shifting careers. This route is around pioneering. And here, the intention that we're making known is not a role that we want. It's something that we're interested in. It's an opportunity that we want to be involved in. It's a change that we want to, push through. And it's a goal that we want to attain. The strategy there is a little different. And what we do is we go out and we get buy-in, we get recognition with this goal, this change imperative, this opportunity. And in doing that and getting that buy-in, we almost position ourselves as the natural leader. So we move that forward. There is an outcome. Our role might be expanded or elevated. If we're not successful in that, then the identity work is more around how can we shore up our support network, and what are the other opportunities, strategic ideas and initiatives that I can move forward. And that pioneering approach to career development is something that I see over and over and over again in people who are developing really successful careers. And often what's driving that is that opportunity scanning. There's a curiosity, there's a desire to develop new skills and new capabilities. And sometimes what often is driving that pioneering approach is boredom. People are getting kind of a bit restless or itchy feet in the roles that they're in. So they're out there looking for opportunities, and especially around implementing change. So in the work I do, I'm looking at, what is it that really successful people are doing, especially leaders. And what I would say is at that top of the pyramids. And when we think about what are successful women doing, often actually it's the same as successful men. They're being more confident in their career decisions because they've got a good sense of what does it mean to be successful for them, how do they want to learn and grow, and that enables them to opportunity scan. developing self-awareness, and again tied into then that ability to opportunity scan to see those things that I'm going to get really interested in and could really elevate my experience. And there are change catalysts, and being able to lead and manage change, especially in then those senior roles, is really, really critical. And building relationships and networks, and then building that resilience. And the feature tends to be that pioneering versus I'm climbing the ladder. So often, really successful people have almost a portfolio career or a boundaryless career. And rather than climbing a ladder, I see it a little bit more like a jungle gym. So I'm going to go over here and do some stuff. I'm going to go over here and do some stuff. And there's a really good book called Squiggly Careers, and I can really recommend that. That kind of speaks to that pioneering approach rather than navigating. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what can hold women back. There's a few things that can get in the way that we could explore in ourselves, apart from those wider challenges. Again, I can recommend a really good book called How Women Rise by Sally Helgeson and Marshall Goldsmith. And they speak to some of these beliefs or behaviors that can hold women back, that can get in the way. And certainly in my executive coaching, that tends to resonate with some of the women that I'm coaching. So some of the things that can hold us back, and we tend to be a little bit more reluctant to claim accomplishments, and expect other people to notice our contributions, in a way minimizing. "Oh, it was nothing. It was nothing." Shine a light on somebody else. So sometimes we're just really reluctant to own it. There are a lot of conversations out there around confidence, and women need to develop more confidence. I'm a little uneasy with that conversation. The reason is that I see a lot of confident women doing really amazing things. But when we think back to that idea that, do we communicate our accomplishments? I sometimes think that we don't always close the loop on the communication of what we've achieved and our successes. So this is an interesting piece of research that talks about how we might communicate our accomplishments, and that impacts our presence. So do we use numbers? Do we talk about the monetary impact? And there's a lot of metrics that we can use in higher education around student enrollment, attainment, research papers, grants, income. There's a lot of metrics that we could use. So communicating our accomplishments using numbers, the monetary impact, how we've mentored a team, development of products, processes, services, how long we've been at the company or the organization. What was interesting was that 90% of men were listing 3 or more of those categories. So they're really, really reinforcing their accomplishment, compared to around 45% of women. Women were much more likely to cite success around mentoring or team building. The challenge with that is that's really subjective. So it might not always be about confidence. It might be about how we communicate our successes and the value that we're adding. So I'm just going to encourage you to think about how you communicate your value. What else can hold women back? Building rather than leveraging relationships, not enlisting allies. And when I first got into the women in leadership space, what I found was that there was a lot of networking done, but it was almost like, as soon as we network and we become friends, well, I can't ask a friend who introduced me to somebody. I can't ask a friend to give me a job. I can't ask a friend to fill in the blank. So we build relationships, but don't always leverage them. And putting your job before your career and letting your radar distract you. Women tend to be really good at being busy. But if we're really clear how we're defining success and we keep our eye on the prize, it's about not letting all the busyness, especially in the environment that we work in, it's a very busy environment, and not letting all that busyness distract you from setting goals that help you to get further to where you want to be. And perfection trap, disease to please, overthinking, and so some tendencies that women might have. Overvaluing expertise is a really interesting one. Women tend to value competence and proving of competency. And that can be a challenge, especially when we are looking to progress in our careers or job hunting. And some really interesting work from LinkedIn, who've got lots of statistics around how people job hunt. And what they were finding was that men and women actually browse and engage with vacancies in similar ways, but they apply for them very differently. Research shows that women will apply for a role when they feel they meet 100% of the criteria. Men might apply if they meet 60%. Now, remember what we said about navigating? Um, if I'm climbing the ladder, that also has implications for how able I feel to be able to stretch to the next level. If I feel I have to meet 100% of the criteria of the next role, then I might count myself out of that. And you've got to be in it to win it. So there's some other things that can get in the way, and I'm going to share with you this idea of the double bind, which I think is really quite insidious, especially as we become more senior, and especially in leadership roles. So the double bind is this idea that communal characteristics tend to be ascribed to women. We are supposed to be kind. We're supposed to have interpersonal sensitivity. We're supposed to be nurturing. We're supposed to be helpful. And agentic characteristics are ascribed to men: assertive, confident, ambitious, forceful, independent. The challenge becomes that the research suggests that there's still a think leader, think male perspective. And the challenge for women is in needing to present themselves as agentic, as confident, as assertive, in order to be seen as leaders, but also needing to present themselves as communal and or risk backlash because we're supposed to have good interpersonal relationships. So it creates a challenge for women. I think the challenge is that we're starting to see this as an either or, but perhaps it doesn't need to be that way. However, we're still seeing, certainly in politics, for example, that this plays out. So research in 2010 identified that a female politician's career progress was hindered by the belief that she might seek power, because that violated those communal expectations of women. And it came with these interpersonal penalties for women. Voting preferences for female candidates were negatively influenced by power-seeking intentions. Now, remember what we said about navigating. That's about putting a stake in the ground with the role, with regard to the role I want to do. So the challenge there is, does that create a double bind if I'm stating a claim for a senior role, for example? Am I going to face some backlash because that's seen as agentic, that's seen as competitive, that's seen as decisive and assertive? And certainly we saw an example of this. If anyone was following politics last year, we started to see that kind of play out in the media with regard to the presidential elections. I think it's important that we challenge perceptions. So I don't think it's an either or. I think women can be assertive and decisive and confident, as well as being caring and having good interpersonal relationships. I don't think it needs to be an either or, but it might be that we need to challenge some perceptions. So I don't know if you saw some time ago this exchange between Jacinda Ardern, who was the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Sanna Marin, who was the Prime Minister of Finland, and the press. So they were meeting together, and they were asked by a reporter in the audience. And a lot of people will be wondering if you two are meeting just because you're similar in age and you've got a lot of common stuff going on there. And Ardern responded quite assertively. I wonder whether or not anyone ever asked Barack Obama or John Key if they met because they were a similar age. And Marion said, we are meeting because we are prime ministers. And I just loved this look that Jacinda Ardern gave the reporter. So it's being aware of this idea of the double bind. It's not an either or, but we might need to challenge perceptions. How do we challenge those perceptions? I think there is a piece that's around really holding firm again to our definition of what it means to us to be successful. And remaining authentic. I've been developing leaders for a long time, and it used to be in the late 90s, early 2000s, I would go into a room, especially if I was working with a board, and it would be all men. And then it started, I would go into the room and there might be one woman, but that one woman had learned to be perhaps overly agentic, and had learned to look like, walk like, talk like a man, because looking around the room, that's what I needed to do to be successful. But there's been a huge shift over the last 10 years. Women want to be authentic. They want to be successful as themselves. So success is about defining success for yourself, making sure it's aligned to your values, making sure along the way that what you're pursuing is aligned to your values, and that you're not being shunted down a route that you really don't want to go down. It's also being mindful of what you're giving up along the way. With that definition of what it means for you to be successful, clear values, we can take action and keep moving forward. I did want to talk very briefly about imposter phenomena. I want to put it, sort of on the radar in terms of women building their success and building successful careers. And some of you did ask about this coming into the presentation. So there's a lot of information out there around imposter phenomena, and I do encourage you, if this is something that you feel, to explore some of those resources. And imposter phenomena is about this sort of inability to internalize success. And there can be all sorts of reasons why that might happen. Perfectionism, growing up in a family emphasizing achievement, societal pressure to compare, to have it all. But actually, it could be the environment. It could be the organizational culture. It might not be me. It might actually be the organization. And that's something that we really, really need to consider. There's some things that we can do to help us tackle imposter phenomena. Seek out trusted mentors, really trusted mentors and support network. A realistic assessment of your skills. I'm speeding up now because I'm mindful of time. A realistic assessment of your skills, knowledge and capabilities. Document them and make a note. Track, measure, evidence your successes. Reward yourself and pat yourself on the back and retain collateral of all those things that you've done and done well, so you can go back to those and you've got your evidence. Visualize good outcomes. Be mindful of your inner voice. Sometimes we're incredibly unkind in the way we talk to ourselves. Think about how you're talking to yourself and manage that inner voice. And imagine you were talking to a best friend. We want to be able to talk to ourselves the way we would talk to a best friend. And really consider the culture and the norms that you're seeing around you. So I just want to put on your radar a piece of work that I think is really, really helpful in cultivating support networks. A lot of you had a lot of questions about cultivating those networks. So I find the work of Zella King and Amanda Scott really, really helpful. And there's a link here to Personal Boardroom. And I think this is a really good and strategic way of thinking about your network and your support group. We often think in terms of coaches and mentors, but I'd like you to think beyond that. They talk about these 12 roles so that if you had your own personal boardroom, you were the CEO, the managing director, you invite people to the table and you invite them for a purpose and you have an ask. You're asking something of them. This is reciprocal. You can be in other people's boardrooms. There are some development roles, some people we'd want around our table that help us improve, that challenge us to be our best self, and that are the nerve giver. They encourage us to stretch. The anchor keeps us anchored to our values. And then we've got information roles, the customer voice, the expert, the inspirer, the person who helps you navigate. Women are quite good at surrounding themselves with people who help with development roles and information roles, but they spend less attention on power roles. Power roles are those people who can unlock resources for you, who can sponsor you, who open doors for you. Influencers are those people who can help you gain momentum in what you do. Connectors introduce you to people. I'd really encourage you to have a look at that. There are some little useful videos that help you explore those different roles and really think about the power roles. When we think about our boardroom, we can surround ourselves with supportive men and women. Those roles don't need to be female, don't need to be male, but it's a way of really building our networks. I'm mindful of time, but I just want to share with you a few resources that you can access. One is a free Future Learn short course on inspiring women leaders. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. There's also a micro credential that you can take, again, on inspiring women leaders. I'm going to pause there. I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm just really mindful that I probably had you hopeful that we were going to be able to do some Q&A. I think I probably talked a little bit too long there. But what I'll do is I'll have a look at that Q&A. And if there are some common themes, then I'll find a way to get some of that information to you. I just did notice somebody pop in the chat. I mentioned the book Squiggly Careers. The same people also have a podcast called Amazing If. I really recommend that to you. So some resources there, UN Women, Amazing If, Squiggly Careers, How Women Rise. So some resources that hopefully will help you. I'm just going to, I guess, summarize some points that I think it would be good to take away and from today's session. The first is, I feel like I've repeated it. I'm going to repeat it again. It's just so important that we define success for ourselves, that we don't take on someone else's definition. That could be family, that could be friends. It's really important that you carve out your own path aligned to your values. And then when you are thinking about those work-life choices, you're more able to think about what you want to say yes to and what that means you're saying no to. So when we say yes to the really, really challenging project, we might be saying no to, some family time in the short term. And that's something that we can talk about with our family and support network. So define success for yourself. Think in terms of work-life choices. Be strategic in your support network. Think about those roles, especially power roles, because they are the unlockers of the resource. They are the influencers, they are the sponsors, they're the people that are really going to support you to move forward and build momentum. And when we're thinking about that support network, remember, what's the ask? What are you actually asking people to do? And obviously, it's going to be reciprocal, but sometimes we just don't ask. And then think about those different career routes, navigating versus pioneering, and the pros and cons of each. There's no right or wrong, but depending where you are in your career, one might yield better results than others. And through all of this, I think there's a huge piece that's not about changing who we are. And again, I'm really uneasy with some of the messages out there that are around women need to change and women need to be more male in how we communicate and in how we lead. We don't. We need to be authentic. But that doesn't mean that we don't push back. And that doesn't mean that we don't challenge. I'm mindful there's just a few more minutes to go, and I'm just seeing some bits and pieces pop up in the chat. The recording will be available to you. It'll be on the jobs.ac.uk website in their career advice section. And please have a look at those resources. There's lots and lots of really useful information in that website. And there's also a link to a previous webinar that I did around building resilience. So if any of you feel it's really important for you to do that, then there's some resources on there. For the few minutes to go, I'm just going to say thank you so much for taking the time out to join us today. I hope that's been useful for you, and I hope you've got some sort of practical things that you can take away. Have a look at the recording again, follow the links. There's some links to some resources, and I can see there's some resources being popped in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the day.